The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed quietly above, casting their sterile glow on rows of neatly stacked produce. Chief Marcus Washington was just another face in the crowd that day, not in uniform, not behind his desk at headquarters, but simply a man picking up a few items for dinner. A basket swung lightly in his hand as he browsed through the tomatoes, checking their firmness the way his grandmother once taught him. This was his ritual, small and ordinary. The last thing he expected was a confrontation that would unravel into a public spectacle. It began subtly, almost like a gust of wind you don't notice until it pushes you off balance. A young man, no older than his early 20s, sauntered up to the produce section. He had the kind of arrogance that dripped from his posture, head tilted back, a smirk fixed on his lips. Marcus had seen that look countless times before, usually in booking photos or during tense traffic stops. The entitled bravado of someone who had never truly faced consequences. The young man reached directly into Marcus's basket without a word, fingers wrapping around the cluster of ripe tomatoes Marcus had just chosen. With a mocking glance, he pulled them out as if they had been his all along. "People like you don't deserve these," the young man muttered, his tone low but venomous. The words struck Marcus harder than the theft itself. People like you. He had heard that phrase before, in court testimonies, in whispered slurs during tense neighborhood patrols. It wasn't about groceries. It was about skin, about difference, about superiority claimed through hate. Marcus felt the old sting of racism flare, but he refused to let it control him. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice calm, deliberate, the same tone he used when defusing volatile situations. "Those are mine. Put them back." The young man laughed, not a nervous chuckle, but a sharp, cruel sound meant to humiliate. "What are you going to do about it?" he sneered, holding the tomatoes high as if taunting a child. Other shoppers had started to notice. Heads turned, whispers passed between aisles. Before Marcus could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Shrill, commanding, and dripping with indignation. "Jason! What's going on here?" It was his mother. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. The HOA president, a woman whose reputation stretched far beyond cul-de-sacs and monthly newsletters. She was notorious for barking at neighbors about mailbox heights, lawn lengths, and even the types of people she wanted to keep out of her pristine community. To some, she was just strict. To many, she was a tyrant. To Marcus, she was trouble walking on 2 feet. Jason's smirk widened as his mother approached. "This man tried to steal from me," he said quickly, twisting the truth before Marcus could reply. Marcus let out a slow breath. He had been in these situations before. Lies weaponized against him, narrative spun faster than facts could catch up. Still, he stayed steady. "That's not what happened," he said firmly. "Your son took my groceries." Her eyes narrowed into slits, her expression morphing from faux outrage into full-blown performance. "How dare you speak to my son like that?" she snapped. "You don't belong here, and now you're threatening him?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Ma'am, I haven't threatened anyone. I simply want my groceries back." But she wasn't listening. She had already yanked her phone from her purse, dialing 911 with the speed of someone who thought the system existed solely for her benefit. Marcus knew what was coming before the first words even left her mouth. "Yes, hello, this is an emergency," she screeched into the phone, loud enough for half the store to hear. "There's a dangerous man in the produce section. He's threatening my son. You need to send backup immediately. 20 cars. I'm serious, he's aggressive and out of control." Gasps echoed across the aisle. A mother shopping with her child pulled the little one closer. An elderly man frowned, unsure what to believe. The weight of her accusations, laced with hysteria, fell heavily into the air. Marcus remained still. His instincts, honed from decades of law enforcement, told him not to escalate. He knew the dispatcher on the other end of that line. He knew the call would be logged, recorded, and reviewed. And most importantly, he knew the woman had just made a catastrophic mistake. Because Marcus Washington was not just any man at the grocery store. He was Chief Marcus Washington, commander of every officer she was demanding be sent.
The irony was almost laughable, if not for the racial venom underlining the entire scene. Shoppers watched the unfolding drama, unsure of the truth. To them, it was a clash of perspectives. To Marcus, it was an all too familiar attempt to weaponize the police against a black man, something he had sworn to protect others from, now aimed directly at him. The young man, Jason, puffed up with confidence under his mother's shield. He tossed the tomatoes lightly in his hand, as though mocking Marcus's restraint. "See, Mom? He's just standing there, thinking he's tough. He's not gonna do anything." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He let her voice carry, let her lies pile up, because he knew the higher the stack, the harder the fall would be when the truth came crashing down. "Officers will be here any second," she said triumphantly after hanging up. "And when they arrive, you'll regret ever stepping foot in this store." Marcus met her glare with calm, unwavering eyes. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to defend himself in that moment. Evidence, law, and truth were already on his side. What she didn't realize was that the very officers she thought she could summon like pawns all answered to him. The aisle seemed to hold its breath. Shoppers shuffled awkwardly, sensing the weight of something bigger than groceries. And Marcus, basket still in hand, simply stood his ground, waiting not for backup, but for the inevitable moment when her house of lies would collapse under the weight of reality. The grocery store incident had been humiliating, but for Marcus, it was never just about tomatoes or a false 911 call. It was about principle. He had seen too many lives shattered because someone, somewhere, weaponized fear and lies. This time, he wasn't just a witness. He was the target. And as police commander, he wasn't about to let it slide into silence. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. By the next morning, residents whispered at mailboxes and over coffee, "Did you hear what happened at the store? Did you see Karen call the cops?" Some refused to believe it, clinging to the HOA president's image as a community protector. Others shook their heads knowingly they had been on the receiving end of her arrogance for years. But gossip wasn't enough. Proof was needed. That proof arrived in the form of hidden cameras. For months, small acts of vandalism had plagued the community: scratched cars, damaged mailboxes, spray-painted slurs on fences. Karen and her son had always blamed outsiders, pushing fear to tighten her grip on HOA control. But a few frustrated residents, tired of paying repair bills, had quietly installed cameras around their properties. What those cameras caught was damning. Late at night, Jason and a couple of his friends were seen roaming the neighborhood with spray cans and screwdrivers. They laughed as they slashed tires. They shoved trash into mail slots. In one clip, Jason himself was caught carving an obscene word into a black neighbor's garage door. And standing just out of frame in another video, but unmistakable in voice, was his mother, urging him on. When the first resident handed Marcus a USB stick of footage, his chest tightened. Not because he was surprised, but because it confirmed what he already suspected: the grocery store wasn't an isolated tantrum. It was the tip of a much darker iceberg. Within days, the evidence piled up. More neighbors came forward with recordings, texts, and stories they had kept to themselves out of fear of retaliation. One man admitted he had paid fines to the HOA for violations he never committed: his trash bin supposedly left out too long, his grass cut an inch too short. Now, with the videos in hand, it was clear the fines had been a smokescreen for harassment. Marcus knew this wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about restoring justice to a community that had been manipulated and bullied. So he called for a community meeting. Officially, it was scheduled as a special HOA session. Unofficially, it was about to become the most crowded, explosive gathering the neighborhood had ever seen. On the night of the meeting, the community center overflowed. Folding chairs filled every corner, and people lined the walls, buzzing with anticipation. Some carried folders of their own grievances, others clutched printouts of emails Karen had sent. Nasty, accusatory messages now read with new context. At the front of the room, Karen tried to maintain her usual commanding presence. She wore her sharpest blazer, stood tall, and tapped her pen against the podium as if the sound alone could silence the crowd. Jason sat slouched beside her, arms crossed,
glaring at anyone who dared meet his eyes.
Then Marcus stepped forward.
Not in uniform, but with the quiet authority that came from a lifetime of service.
He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to.
"Good evening," he began, his voice steady.
"We're here tonight because this community deserves truth.
And truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried."
The room hushed.
Karen shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a laptop connected to the projector. The screen lit up, and the first video played, Jason spray painting a fence under the cover of darkness.
Gasps rippled across the room. Karen's face paled.
Clip after clip rolled on vandalism, harassment, slurs.
Some residents covered their mouths in shock. Others muttered angrily under their breath. By the time the final video ended, the atmosphere was electric with outrage. Karen tried to interject. "These videos are fake. This is harassment against me."
"You don't understand, he was framed." But Marcus cut her off calmly. "The timestamps match police reports.
The voices are yours.
The property damage aligns with insurance claims. This isn't a smear campaign.
It's evidence."
Jason slammed his fist on the table.
"This is ridiculous. You people are just jealous. My mom runs this place because none of you can." The outburst backfired.
Boos erupted from the crowd. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now shouted openly, "You vandalized my car.
You fined me for nothing. We trusted you."
The HOA board, long complicit or too intimidated to resist, finally cracked under the pressure.
One by one, board members distanced themselves from Karen. "We can't support this behavior," one muttered, shaking his head.
Another called for an immediate vote of no confidence.
It was swift and unanimous. Karen was stripped of her title as HOA president.
Jason, red-faced and sputtering, stormed out of the room, knocking over a chair on his way. For the first time in years, the community felt free to breathe.
But Marcus didn't stop there.
The next morning, he held a press conference on the courthouse steps.
Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing.
"Yesterday's events highlight a disturbing truth," Marcus said, his words echoing across the plaza. "When authority is abused, when racism and intimidation take root, it doesn't just harm individuals, it poisons entire communities. No one is above the law, not even those who claim to enforce it through neighborhood titles."
The story went viral. Clips from the meeting spread across social media. Headlines blared.
HOA president exposed for vandalism and false 911 call.
Memes mocked Karen's demand for 20 police cars.
Community leaders across the county called Marcus, thanking him for standing firm.
For Karen, the fallout was devastating.
She lost not only her title but her reputation.
Neighbors avoided her.
Stores whispered when she entered. Friends distanced themselves to protect their own names. Her empire of intimidation crumbled overnight.
For Marcus, the victory wasn't personal glory.
It was justice served. When he returned home after the press conference, he sat quietly on his porch, watching children play in the street without fear. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt lighter. He thought back to that grocery aisle, to the tomatoes, the smirk, the shrill 911 call.
It could have gone differently. If he hadn't been who he was, if he hadn't had the patience, the resources, the authority, things might have ended in tragedy. But instead, lies were dismantled by evidence. Hate was silenced by truth.
And a community, once trapped under the thumb of intimidation, was free to reclaim its dignity.